Hello, it's Chelsea from Pink Door Fabrics, and we're so excited to be bringing to you month 3 of the Queen of Diamonds. So we hope you're enjoying this. Again, I always like to reiterate, none of this is a race. Take your time, enjoy it. Everyone's going to get through this at a little different speed, so don't let that hinder you or make you upset, I hope. We're all here to have fun. So we are excited to be bringing you the next installment of our little videos for that. Tula had her video up on her socials yesterday, so we got to see some of her new blocks, which is really fun and exciting. But I just wanted to go through, this is a pretty brief one. A lot of these same techniques are ones that we've learned previously. Excuse me. So we're going to go through just a few of those things. I apologize for not getting this up yesterday. I had an unexpected brief foray to the eye doctor, so all's well, but I apologize for the delay on that. So excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. So we're on month 3, and this is the first of our sort of partial blocks. And so this, don't let it scare you. Don't worry about any of this. It's much the same, exact same techniques that we've already learned. You're just going to be making not quite a whole block. So the best way to do this is, again, we've shown you how many pieces of each you need to cut. There's very little fussy cutting that happens in this one, with the exception of the stripes. And so just pay attention on those, and really, truly, I just eyeball those stripes. So with these ones, there, I put the point, of course I don't have my little triangle here, but you know which one it is, the A template on top of those stripes, and I just aligned it right in the middle of them. Let me grab my piece and I'll show you. In the middle of them, in between the two pink vertical stripes. So I aligned the top of my template in between those. Again, just eyeball it and you'll be totally fine, so that they all look the same, and cut them that way. The only thing you need to be aware of when we make this block, just like I've shown you here, is that you're going to make all of these centers, even though we're going to cut it down later, because these pieces end up being on the edge of your quilt. So this one ends up being on the right side, which is why we're cutting off the right side. Some others will be on the left, and we'll cut those off later. Don't trim those yet. I would highly recommend leaving those in until we get to the point at which we're going to put on our sashings and cornerstones and borders. One thing I do want to mention about that, we keep seeing questions about that. You are receiving new fabric later in the block of the month program, if you're doing it through the program, or the fabric program through a local shop. You're going to be receiving fabric for your cornerstones and your not the Mick Jaguar, I'm sorry, you've already received the Mick Jaguar, but you're going to receive additional fabric for all the cornerstone little colored pieces, as well as the white fairy flake sashing that we call it. So don't stress out about that now. I have purposefully chosen not to go over those things now because you don't have the fabric for it. So there's no sense in stressing about that now. The only rule to any of this is that regardless of which way you're going to be doing this, whether you're going to machine piece your sashing and border pieces, or you're going to English paper piece them, whatever that's going to be, you need to leave these papers in, so you can take out any papers that are completely surrounded on all sides by another piece of fabric. So for here, these pieces, as you can see, are not surrounded by fabric, and so you need to leave those paper pieces in, at least for now. We're going to take those out later. Don't stress about those. I'm not going to go into it at this point because we don't need to worry about that until we're ready to do borders and sashing. That's going to be a whole separate month and video, so don't worry about that until then. The blocks for this month are pretty straightforward. You are going to be making 2 of these, which is why you see additional quantities of those. And so because of the printing process for those neon inks, they are a little bit thicker than a traditionally printed fabric. And so one little hack that I wanted to give you for this particular block today is this. So in the rendering, we have them shown where it's color on top of color. And that can be a little difficult depending on your needle or thread or whatever you're using to get that through there, especially if you have any arthritis or anything like that. It can be a little more challenging to get through those rather than regular quilting cotton. So here's my recommendation. You know, I love my lay it on top of the other fabric hack so that you get the mirror image of that all at the same time. I'm all for trying to save time when cutting fabric because I have 2 little kids, and the faster I get it done, the faster I can move back on to other things. And my time is limited with that. So here's my trick for that. I'm going to suggest, if you have any issues or you feel like that might be an issue getting through that thicker pigment ink on that fabric, that you align them color stripe to gray stripe, because instead of trying to get through 2 thicknesses, let me make sure that's close so I don't slice myself. Instead of trying to get through 2 thicknesses of pigment ink, then you're only trying to get through 1, which will be way easier. So what I'm going to advise that you do, if that you feel like that might be a concern for you, to cut these, you're going to take both of those pieces. You're going to lay your colored stripe, and I'll hold this up again in just a minute. It looks like you can see. But you're going to lay your colored stripe here, align it with the gray stripe of the other fabric. And that way they will totally, when you cut those 2 pieces, they should match up just perfectly. Now, because of the way that this pigment ink is, it sits on top of the fabric. And so the substrate, or the bottom color, let's call it, of this fabric is this sort of gray color. And so when this fabric was printed, I will say, we realized this when we were making this. I went, oh geez, these stripes don't line up perfectly. The pigment ink is thicker and it spreads a little bit. So this is one of those situations where nobody is going to notice this sort of thing in the grand scheme of things, so don't stress out about it. There are far bigger things in this world to stress out about than that. So it's going to be off by like a 1/16 of an inch. Again, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to notice that. So I think you can see this, and you can see that I've got, it creates kind of a checkerboard situation here. And since I've got these laid one on top of the other, and I'm just going to make sure that they're laid the same way down at this end, that I didn't get them crooked somehow. If you lay these right on top of there in the way, same thing, I'm just kind of eyeballing this, and I'm going to align this gray stripe and this gray stripe with this inside of this template. So let me tip this up. Gray stripe goes right down that line. Gray stripe, again, because they're just a little bit off, I'm just going to split the difference because it will be totally fine. And I lay those down, and I'm going to cut those just like that. This is harder to do. I usually stand and cut, so it's a weird thing for me to sit and cut. Oops. Let's turn it. I'll just do one of these for you. You don't need to see me do 2 of them. Apparently I need a new blade. You can use a new one on yours. And then you end up with these pieces when you go to sew them together. That should work. I'm going to hold it together so that you can see how they'll alternate. And I'm just going to pretend like there's a 3/8 inch seam there. When those line up, it will alternate. So you'll end up with pigment ink on top of the gray ink and vice versa. And just kind of move them. This is one of those areas with English paper piecing, you can stretch and pull, you're the boss of this fabric, to where you need it to be. So I would base these pieces. It even helps, if you want, to take this piece, if you happen to have your glitter washi tape on it. I don't have a friction pen here. Well, maybe I do. Hold up. This is another little trick so that you know exactly where to place that template on the inside of it. I don't have a friction pen. Would you guys grab me one, please? And you can put your little, I'll show you where to trace it in just a second, but if you've got, you'll see your little seam allowance line here. So when you go to do that, if you want to trace exactly where that paper is going to go on the back of it, where you know, thank you, where to baste it, you can take your template at the edge of your fabric and line that template up with the edge of that fabric, or the inside line, which is your seam allowance line. Just draw a little line on the back side of your fabric. Again, you're never going to see this, and this is the side on which you based. So you can do that around all 4 sides here. I'm just going to do it real quick. Trace around it. This is a friction pen, so heat will make it disappear. It's on the back side of your fabric. You're never going to see it, so I wouldn't worry about even trying to make it go away. And then I'll show you the magic of this. So that's traced, and since we fussy cut those, then when you go to baste your piece, you lay it down. I can't see on that side of it. We'll just pretend. There you go. Those lines are exactly where you're going to put that paper so that then those pieces will align when you put them together. That seemed like a lot of extra words, but you catch my drift. So that's the way to do those. If you want to do it the same way that we've rendered it in the book, totally fine. We've just seen that it's maybe a little bit more difficult to get through pigment ink on top of pigment ink. Not impossible at all. We like to use a good sharp needle for that, and you shouldn't have any trouble. So either way you do those is totally fine, but those are a few little tips and tricks that might make that a little easier for you. And then moving on to block 3.4. This one can look a little more intimidating because it's more pieces than we've done before. Don't let that scare you. Same basic premise that we've been learning is the same thing here. So nothing new. I will briefly go over the little stripes and how to orient those, but the way I like to take these bigger blocks with lots of pieces is to just break them down into little smaller chunks is the way that I do that. And so for this one, I've got this little triangle piece and I call that one mini block. And then this piece ends up being kind of one bigger block. But in our assembly diagrams, you can see that we've broken it down for you into each of these little pieces end up being one little hexagon. And so especially with this little piece, what I like to do is take a K to an L and a K to an L. And again, I use my little wool mat, or you could use a foam core board or whatever works your design wall before. I don't know if paper pieces stick to your design wall once they have papers in there. They definitely will before you have the papers in. But I like to sew this to this and this to this and then just do one seam across. I think it's easier than wedging pieces in and having to bend them back to make that turn. These are just simple straight seams, straight seam, and then one more straight seam. And I think then when you sew this top to this bottom of these little hexagons, it makes sense to really align that L, those two L centers. And so let's see if I've got a piece where I can kind of show you how that's done. We're gonna pretend like I've got, I don't have a great example. Let's see here. I have one that I started out of other fabrics. So we're just gonna pretend like this is a piece. I don't have another. Oh, I do. Look at that. My day's working out for me. So pretend like these are the same fabric. So I would sew this piece to this piece, which again is just a simple straight seam, cut it, set it aside. Same thing for this. It's less noticeable here because this is not as much of a directional fabric. I'm not specifically trying to match up these patterns exactly like you will be with the stripe. It's not stressful. Don't stress out about it. And then what I'm going to do, now I got this backwards. Hold on. Bear with me. Is take, these are kites and triangles versus I would be using triangles. But then when you go to sew this little module to this module, which is what you'll have once you do those, is you're going to fold those together. This will be sewn together. We're going to have pretend today, and this will be sewn together. And what you do, sorry, I didn't think about having to demo this. We're just going to pretend, is that when you, if you've got these two pieces together and those two pieces together, I would personally clip that center really well together. So that's where I like my Wonder Clips, and I hold those, well, it would be together if it were sewn together. You know what I'm saying here. I'm going to hold that together. And if you want, if you're concerned about it shifting, you can do a little tiny stay stitch there. Just tie a little knot in it and make sure. I like to kind of grab this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece and make a little X in the center of that block. That way you know that that center will match up perfectly every time. So, and then I would go back and sew from left to right or right to left, whichever way you decide. I have a left-handed mom, so I tend to do things apparently backwards, I've learned in my older age. So that makes making or matching up those center points a lot easier. Just a little tacking stitch from this K to that K and this L to that L a little X in front of there, and then sewing that seam together. So if you break that apart, you've got this hexagon. You basically have 6 modules. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. And then it makes it, I like to add these little C pieces onto there, and that makes a little sort of trapezoid module. And then same thing here, you've got another trapezoid module, and C to C and another trapezoid module. And then it's a lot easier. Then I would go around this and this and this, and then sew these to these. So however you want to break it up. Sometimes I like to work personally with things that fit in my hand, because once they get bigger, they're harder and a little more unwieldy to carry around. And so this is a bit of an example of that. This one, I assembled this center portion first of this block. So I did these 3 pieces. So I'd attach this to this, and then that, and then you've got that piece as one. And then I attached it to this piece, and then same thing. This was a smaller module that then I attached to here. This was sort of one strip, and then I made this as a completely separate piece. Same thing here, and then one seam across there. I try to minimize as many sort of, I don't want to call them Y seams, which are totally achievable in English paper piecing. But the more you can use straight seams across those things, you don't have to stress out as much about lining up those seams. So it just makes that a little bit easier. So, and again, one thing that we can talk briefly about with that owl, here's my owl fabric, is if you're not an owl sort of person, it's totally fine. If you wanted to make something different of that center, clearly you have some fabric to work with. So you could take, let's say that you like the flower better because it has a little bit more of the blue or something in that. Totally fine. Again, you can fussy cut to your little heart's content about those center pieces and incorporate different colors, or it's fun to see you guys changing that up. One other quick mention I wanted to make is you've got a fat quarter of this lazy stripe fabric that becomes this sort of focal point around the center of this. We render these things digitally, and the computer likes to pretend like there are no seams in this because it clearly is not a sewer, which is a travesty unto itself. But it sort of shows these as though you fussy cut these and continued all the way around and there are no seams. Please don't let that deter you. We don't actually intend for you to cut that specifically so that all those lines move up or move just the way that they do in our rendering. It's sort of the magic of, there's the magic of the TV and there's the magic of the rendering, that things are pretty close, but they're not quite the way that they might be in real life. So you've got plenty of this. My recommendation personally with this would be I don't think it's a terrible idea just to start cutting wherever this may be. I think it would be, I'm sure there's a repeat to this. What that would be a little bit more difficult to figure out. I think our intent with that was just that there was sort of these wavy lines around the center, so don't let that scare you or intimidate you, or in some cases drive you nuts that they have to be exactly the ways ours are. I would just cut these wherever they happen to fall for that piece and not stress out about it. So hopefully that helps. A few other things, like I said, we'll be going over plenty. We have an entire couple video series planned for how to do these sashings and the cornerstones and the secondary sashing of the fairy flakes when we get to that point. So I encourage you to be patient with us. This is a process. We are going to be going over that in great amounts of depth. When we get to that, you don't have the fabric for it now, so don't stress out. Don't fret. We've got you covered. And then next month, we're going to start diving into some tiny piecing. Again, none of it's stressful, same principles that we've already worked on. So we hope you enjoy this. It's fun to see all of your progress, and we'll see you next month.